we may be guiding the largest ecosystem restoration project in the world, sounding the wake-up call on a Category 6 hurricane, producing more tech diversity than Silicon Valley, and transforming one of the most important cities in the U.S. But FIU talent also knows that making a real impact on the big challenges we all face means entering the arena, being in the room where it happens, and leading our nation's research progress. So we're doubling down on the District of Columbia. We're here to provide diverse approaches to our federal research partners and in the halls of Congress, to convene our research collaborators from across the U.S. while creating engaging academic experiences for our students and bringing the magic of Miami to the nation's capital. FIU is a leader, redefining the American Research University, delivering on educational excellence, high social mobility, and high research impact. So join us and experience FIU.
Good evening, everyone. Hope you're doing well today. Welcome to FIU in DC, and welcome to Infrastructure Week. My name is Andres Velasco, and I'm a proud 2023 FIU graduate and one of the Hamilton Scholars this past semester. Tonight, we're excited to host this dialogue, which will bring together insights on collaborative research with partners, FIU's own expertise as Florida's University of Distinction and Environmental Resilience, and important stakeholders such as congressional staffers and agencies, officials, and our own corporate and civic leadership from Miami. We're very excited to have the Greater Chamber of Commerce here with us today for Miami. And as a Hamilton Scholar, I helped support our research last semester that you will learn about here tonight. There is a dire need for more investment in research surrounding infrastructure and surrounding resilience. Just think, $210 billion cost and damage and natural hazard damages in 2020 alone. The greater risk occurs in coastal regions such as Miami. Threatened by sea level rise and warming seas, 127 million Americans, or roughly 40% of the United States population, lives in coastal counties. This has increased by 40 million since 1970. And before we continue, I would like to acknowledge some special guests we have with us today. Dan Liang, Program Director of the Engineering Directorate with the National Science Foundation. We have Deidre Chester, USDA Director, Office of the Chief Scientist, and an FIU alum. We have former Florida Senator Jose Javier Rodriguez, proud Miamian and nominee to be the Assistant Secretary of Labor. We have Loreto Munoz, Chair of the Greater Miami Chamber, and Alfredo Sanchez, President of the Greater Miami Chamber. To get us started here today, let me introduce a number of amazing individuals and experts that you will be learning from here today. We have Dr. Ioannis Zizis, Co-Director for the Laboratory for Wind Engineering Research at FIU. We have Dr. Kristen Taylor, Department of Political Science at Wayne State University. We have Dr. Frank Lombardo, Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, University of Illinois. And to start us off this evening, we have Carolyn Robertson, Co-Director of Extreme Events Institute at FIU. So please welcome Carolyn up to the stage.
Everyone. Thank you. So at FIU, we take natural disasters quite seriously. In 1992, we were impacted by Hurricane Andrew, which really changed the landscape for that area. But politicians, business leaders, we all came together and we decided to not only build stronger, but build better. And through that, we decided to better our building codes. We came together as a community and we built a stronger Miami. So from Hurricane Andrew, the International Hurricane Research Center was developed at Florida International University. And we have a vast research portfolio which spans several different laboratories. Today we're here to talk about the wind engineering facility, Wall of Wind. So in 2016, we became part of this NEARI network, which is funded through the National Science Foundation. And this network is comprised of 12 institutions dedicated to reducing property loss, protecting lives, and decreasing economic losses. So together we study the impacts of wind, water, and earthquake research through 8 experimental facilities. And then also we look at data duration and computational dynamic testing. Here we have the niche facility, which we'll get to later in the presentation. This whole network is part of the Large Facilities Office supported through the National Science Foundation. And to explain the Wall of Wind experimental facility, I'll bring up this video here. There you go.
Guys, I am in Miami at Florida International University with Eric Salna. Eric, thank you very much for having us out.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
We're standing in front of the Wall of Wind, AKA, wow, it's 12 giant fans that are able to create what kind of a hurricane are we talking about?
Well, we can create up to a Category 5 hurricane wind speeds over 157 miles per hour.
Right now, what we're testing is transmission lines for power. And that's important because, of course, we all depend on electricity as homes go all electric more and more, right? Those things can create what I think is a very laminar flow, which is interesting to us because in homes, we're very kind of concerned with airflow measurements. And airflow is the hardest thing to measure because it's squirrely. It kind of goes all over the place. But here you can make it go perfectly straight. And I stepped into the flow and out of it. Is that your goal?
Our goal is to certainly focus the wind towards the turntable where the structure is. But a hurricane wind is not nice and straight and laminar and smooth. It's actually very turbulent. We have engineered into the system a turbulent flow that mimics a hurricane flow. You know, at the surface where we are and our homes, we've got buildings and trees and structures, and that creates a friction layer. So in the real world, wind increases with height in a hurricane condition. So that's what we wanted to create here at the Wall of Wind. In that flow management, the wind would increase with height because those tiles, those metal tiles, replicate the buildings and the trees and the obstructions. So over the ocean, there's not as much friction, right? So the wind speeds are pretty high over the water. As that hurricane circulation moves on land, on shore, and then starts moving inland, it slows down, but the winds also slow down as well. It can drop tremendous amounts of rain at that point, but the strongest and highest wind speeds are typically right along the coast. We do have another feature that we can add to the system that's fairly new to the Wall of Wind. We've been all about hurricane, but we can now create a downburst wind. A downburst wind comes from a severe thunderstorm. So a column of air that drops vertically down from that cloud, hits the ground and spreads out, which can do a lot of damage, sometimes perceived as it was a tornado, but it never was. It was just a downburst straight line wind. So we are now getting into some research related to that.
This is the place that we use to put most of the sensors that we're going to install in the different models, and all the cables from accelerometers, load cells, and strain gauges come down here so we can test it without disrupting the flow around the models. So that's basically what we have in here.
When we have strong winds, just like the hurricanes, the loading that we have on the towers are different from what is being accounted for in the current codes of practice.
And you think that the engineering assumptions that we made in the modeling from a long time ago isn't right, which is why we're actually testing it.
Yes, some of that. And also, you know, currently now we're experiencing more intense winds, and so we need to design for the expected intense winds that we have in
To update the models
Yes,
for like global weirding. All right, cool. Winds are more intense. Thank you very much, buddy.
We are just over 10 years old. We debuted on the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Andrew, and we just had the 30th anniversary this past August.
So thank you. That is part of a series that PBS is doing actually on the experimental facilities as part of the NEARI network. So now I'd like to invite Dr. Zissis to discuss another National Science Foundation program, IUCRC.
All right. So NEAS was a pivotal moment for the academic wind engineering community back in 2016, the program that Caroline introduced. And a few years later, we were approached by someone who is in the audience today, Dr. Dan Liang from Texas Tech University, to pursue a NEARC University Cooperative Research Center, an IUCRC. This is a very unique program because it brings together academia, academic community, and industry. So the IUCRC is trying to cover that gap between fundamental research and applied research. The program has three major primary objectives: conduct high-impact research to meet shared industrial needs in companies of all sizes, enhance U.S. global leadership in driving innovative technology and development, and identify, mentor, and develop a diverse, high-tech, exceptionally skilled workforce. A few basic stats for the IUCRC program. In 2020, over 750 companies participated in the IUCRC program. On average, evaluation data shows that the companies realize a 22 times return on their membership investment. And today we have more than 80 active centers, and each center has a unique research focus, which brings us to our center, that is collaboration among three academic institutions: TTU, Texas Tech University, Florida International University, and we have an affiliate site, Florida Institute of Technology. And right now we have 7 companies that participate in the center. I should mention that these companies, they pay membership fees to become members of the center. We get funding from National Science Foundation for our operation of the center, and the membership fees that we collect from the 7 partners, they're all of these funds are used for research, and research that is based on their needs. So as principal investigators, we discuss with them the research needs, and we propose projects that we can do at the sites, Texas Tech, Florida International, and Florida Tech. And this is, I think, a very unique opportunity to come closer to industry partners and apply our findings, our research findings. Sorry, I skipped a slide. So the mission of the center, the Wind Hazard Infrastructure Performance Center, is to pursue research that is of interest to industry to enhance the resilience of buildings and infrastructure to extreme windstorms such as hurricanes and tornadoes. This is the only IUCRC that deals with this topic, wind hazards and infrastructure performance. And we have a very detailed document with research topics that we can pursue, but I would summarize everything in those 4 basic research themes, which is characterize the wind hazards, assess the vulnerability of buildings and infrastructure, enhance buildings and infrastructure resilience, and evaluate the societal impact by the wind hazards. Now, moving to the third major theme of our laboratory, the MSRI program. This is the newest program that we pursued. This stands for the Mid-Scale Research Infrastructure Program. It's again an NSF program, National Science Foundation. We have the Major Research Instrumentation Program, MRI, that funds projects proposals up to $4 million, and that is for instrumentation, established back in the 80s. Then we had something that was pretty big, the Major Research Equipment and Facilities. So we're talking about very large facilities beyond the $70 million. And in 2020, NSF introduced the MSRI, Mid-Scale Research Infrastructure. And we have different 1 and 2, depending on the level, design and implementation, that created in 2020. So then NSF awarded a $12.8 million 4-year cooperative agreement for the NEAS design. NEAS stands for the National Full-Scale Testing Infrastructure for Community Hardening in Extreme Wind, Surge, and Wave Events. What we envision is a facility that can go beyond what Caroline mentioned before about the wall of wind, the 157 miles per hour. We've seen stronger events, and we have the 200 miles per hour here. It was a nice number to pursue, I think, but it's realistic. You know, we've seen events that are beyond the 157 miles per hour. And this is a group effort. We have 9 universities working on this program and 1 industry partner. And we're excited that we have 2 of our partners here. I will pass it to Frank to talk a little bit more about the niche details. Thank you.
Thanks, Johannes. So I'll tell you a little more details about the niche project and what's been going on. So we had a virtual meeting in 2020 of experts from research and practice to talk about what is a community do we want to have in a large facility like niche. And really 2 major things came out. One is that we needed to have unique capabilities, something with really high wind speeds, he mentioned the 200 miles per hour, and also the water hazards as well. And then not only these, really to have more size and power than any other facility that's out there right now. And in addition to unique capabilities, also integrated capabilities. So anywhere be able to put a full-scale 2-story house in this facility all the way down to smaller scale communities that would be able to put a niche. And so once the niche team was formed, we kind of talked about, all right, so what do we want to inform the design of a potential niche facility? And we kind of came up with these kind of big picture components that we wanted to integrate. So one is kind of small scale lab experiments, which you can see there in the bottom left. The second is from actual measurements in the field. And then the third is some concepts from large scale facilities, similar to the wall of wind. For example, IBHS, which is a kind of a large scale windstorm simulator, and kind of take all these concepts together and come up with a design of the facility. And so here's just a conceptual rendering of niche. And again, I stress that this is not what the final design is going to look like, but really 2 major things that I wanted to point out here. One is the scale. So here you can see what's supposed to be a full-scale 2-story house that can fit in the facility, so you can do damage testing, for example. And not only wind, but water as well. So both wind and water in a large-scale facility is really the concept for niche. And so I'll give a little bit on kind of what's going on in the science side. So the first question was, are there any existing facilities throughout the world that can really compete with what at least the vision was for niche? And so the group kind of did a landscape assessment. They looked at facilities around the world and looked at what their capabilities were. And you can see some pictures of some of the facilities here. And then what we wanted to do was compare these experimental facilities to what has been measured in the field. So for example, on the bottom here, this is wind speed, and on in this direction is wave height. And so the green dots are the experimental facilities that are out there, and the blue and orange dots are from real field data. And so really 2 things to point out here. So once you get to the really high wind speeds and the really high waves, there are no experimental facilities that can recreate that. But some of the facilities that exist, so for example, UC San Diego has a facility that can do both wind and water. Oregon State has a facility that can do waves or water. And so some of the current facilities can help inform the design of niche, and we'll do some further experimental testing in some of these facilities to help with the niche design. And so downbursts were mentioned earlier. So other extreme wind events, for example, can be tornadoes, right? Very devastating, cause damage throughout the US. And so the main question was, can we potentially recreate something like a tornado in the niche facility? And so the question is, possibly. And so I'll show a video here, maybe. Kind of move this in here. And so really the question is, can we recreate something that resembles a vortex in what amounts to a straight line wind facility like niche? And so we've done some computational fluid dynamics simulations, basically using what we call louvers. They're like fins that you can kind of direct the flow in certain directions. And so here's an example from computational fluid dynamics that shows you can create a vortex, and it kind of moves through the domain in this case. And so here's just kind of a still example of that, where you kind of use a wall or louvers to kind of block the flow in one portion, and then you can really generate these vortices in a straight line wind facility. Typically, tornadoes are simulated in very specialized facilities geared towards tornado simulation. And so one of the concepts is this kind of louver system. Here's kind of conceptual drawing of the louvers, where basically you can close or open these and generate realistic wind flows. And so not only can it help us try to generate tornadoes, for example, but also help develop more realistic wind flow, like was mentioned earlier. Okay, and so now I'll turn it over to Kristen, and she'll talk about some of the tangible benefits of niche.
Thank you, Frank. My mic is not on. Let's see, but I can do this. So many of us who work on the Niche project have long careers working in hazards and disasters research. And one of the things that many of us have talked about is how do we translate this into real tangible benefits for people in communities? How do we make an impact? How do we help make people safer and more resilient in the face of a disaster? So we are working towards two sets of tangible benefits to come from the Niche project. A set of scientific benefits that will very likely help improve building codes and building designs, and sort of test the underlying assumptions around how we design buildings to withstand wind, wave, and storm surge. The Niche, when it is built, when it is actualized, it will help us realize and validate a lot of the computer simulations that Forest ran. Help us realize those in a real facility. We certainly can't test every single building technique or innovation. It's just too expensive to put it in a facility and run wind and water at it. But we can run it in a simulation and then validate those results in the real world. It'll create more reliable risk assessments for communities. And so for communities that have gone through a period of reevaluating their flood maps with FEMA and under the National Flood Insurance Program, having a more realistic risk assessment will help people know what insurance costs. They'll help people understand what their risk is in their homes and to their personal property. And there are a lot of unknowns in building and the results of the research from the facility. We don't really know, because there hasn't been a facility built yet, how the interaction between wave, wind, storm surge, and potential tornadic activity. We don't really know what new lines of research findings from that will open up. And so the facility in and of itself will hopefully create new lines of research. There are also practical benefits. One of the big ones that's built into the program is workforce development. So we are working to and planning to train a next generation of engineers who will be very capable at understanding these multifaceted hazards that communities face as disasters become more frequent and more intense. They will also become more adept at working in a multidisciplinary environment with social scientists, like political scientists like me, who think about barriers to mitigation and the politics of mitigation. So these next generation of engineers will be cued into the social vulnerability that's so important in thinking about how we plan for and prepare for disasters. And then the other piece that I'll spend a little bit more time talking about is the translation of research into policy and practice. And the way that we're really doing that in the Niche is through stakeholder engagement at the design phase. Here we go. So our long-term, So our long-term goal for stakeholder engagement is to really use findings from the facility to initiate communities to have this rapid uptake of innovations in building code design, in structural mitigation, or in building codes, to really foster innovation and encourage communities to adopt those practices quickly. Again, as scholars of hazards and disasters, we have all become frustrated by watching the slow progression of research into industry policy and practice. And so we're interested in fostering that along. Our approach is somewhat innovative for stakeholder engagement in a facility of this nature. So we are inviting stakeholders in at the outset. We want stakeholders to tell us what kind of information we can devise from the research that the facility generates that will be the most compelling. A lot of the social science research around barriers to mitigation and barriers to climate change adaptation and barriers to disaster preparedness indicate that communities that have clear, understandable information that's given to them by other agencies or levels of government that are credible and convincing help overcome that barrier to changing the building code, to changing land use planning, to changing design standards for the community. So we are really interested in engaging with our stakeholders, federal, state, local governmental actors, whether that's political or agency staff. We're really interested in engaging with regional councils of government to help reach underserved communities or under-resourced communities. And we're really interested in engaging neighborhoods at the community level, people who speak for neighborhoods at the community level to help us better understand and access groups that are socially vulnerable, that will help us understand what it will take to overcome barriers to household level mitigation. And with that, I will pass it over to Carolyn.
And quickly in closing, we just wanted to highlight the importance of educating the next generation. So these are some very successful programs we have at Florida International University. The first two, research education for undergraduates and research education for teachers. These are NSF-supported programs that most of the collaborators within the NEARI network participate with, where we're providing unique experiences for undergraduates and exposing teachers to novel ideas that they can then include into their education curriculum. Then we also have FIU's Wind Engineering for STEM teachers, where again, we're helping them to create educational modules to bring into the K-12 classrooms. And then finally, FIU's Wall of Wind Challenge, which of course we have another exciting video to show you, which will summarize this program.
To the test against hurricane force winds. Fox Weather's Brenda Campbell shows us how local high school students are getting involved to understand how buildings can be better built against the world's fiercest conditions.
Well, the Wall of Wind here at Florida International University serves a purpose, helping researchers and businesses test their products and ideas up against hurricane force winds and wind-driven rain. It also has another purpose, helping the next generation get involved. These 12 large electric fans can blow up to Category 5 hurricane wind speeds. Full-scale structures like this yellow building are tested here, seeing if they can withstand the strength of a hurricane. Now it's testing these mini rooftops built by high school students from South Florida. It's part of the Wall of Wind Challenge. 8 high school teams competed, designing and building a roof that will be tethered to a base, judged by civil and structural engineers as wind speeds were raised. Some lasted in wind speeds up to the 50s, 70s. One roof made it to the 90-mile-per-hour range.
I was pretty surprised because I didn't think it would last that long.
It just kept going up, and finally it almost hit like 100, and we were all like really shocked, but happy, very happy about it.
Eric Sauna led the event, explaining why it's important to include the next generation early on.
So the Wall of Wind research is all about resilience, mitigation, how we can build better, build stronger. So this competition now brings these high school students into that mainframe of resilience. And now what can they design that'll be better and stronger? So this competition brings not only that wind engineering into play, but STEM careers, because they are the next generation of our STEM career professionals.
Let's get one more round of applause for all of our presenters today. Thank you so much for joining us and for hearing from our wonderful experts across the country. That will be ending the presentation portion of the programming today. We will now be entering a quick Q&A with our esteemed guests. So this is the part where everybody online, our guests joining us online, and of course our guests joining us here, you will be able to partake and ask any questions that you deem that you want to ask, and please feel free to engage as much as possible. And if I could just have the panelists join us up here. Okay, and we will start the Q&A with a question here prepared. This is for anyone, of course, but please feel free to take it if you feel inclined to, and we can, of course, hear from everyone. But the first question is, one of the goals of this future endeavor is translation of research into policy and practice. As such, a goal needs action by policymakers and adoption by the private sector. Can we walk through a real expected example? And the two-part of this question is, why would Miami be a great candidate for these type of testing facilities and testing research?
Okay. So a real example from the facility. So building codes, right? Building codes save people and property, they save life, and they represent one big area for innovation. And the niche facility between simulation and then full-scale testing would allow us to test new engineered materials. It would allow us to test different kinds of hurricane straps, different kinds of building techniques that might make new construction more sustainable. How do we translate that into policy adoption, particularly in a city like Miami? Miami is a city that is ripe for convincing, right, that these mitigation techniques are worth pursuing and worth adopting. So in a way, being one of the most hazard-prone communities in the country also allows it to be really innovative in its approach. So new building code updates, new building techniques, all can be easily adopted at the municipal level in the city of Miami. It may not necessarily have a big impact on existing houses, but it can have a big impact on new housing and new construction. And what's more, the facility could potentially demonstrate evidence that there are ways to add upgrades and retrofit houses that have survived many hurricanes, but to make them more resilient in the future. Evidence that the facility will generate and how we translate that into information for policymakers that's useful, that's tangible, that's convincing, that they can take to their constituents is how we envision the path from research and development to testing to advocacy towards policy change.
Thank you so much for that response, Dr. Taylor.
I was going to say, do any Miamians want to, I'm the literature writer, want to?
I very quick comment. I agree, completely agree. And I should mention that traditionally Florida, and especially South Florida, has been at the forefront of the building codes. We have been adopting the stringent codes since, I guess, like, there has to be a reason, and that was Hurricane Andrew, obviously. It was a wake-up call. And it's a real problem for not only for the academic community, but for the average person. And you can you can showcase the importance of having such a facility testing at full scale, something that you see. It's not a small model. It's not something that looks fake in a sense. You have the actual structure. You have the ability to replicate a very extreme wind and water event and storm surge. And it's a great example for to educate basically the public. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, just a quick comment as an outsider, not a, a part of FIU or live in South Florida, but I think FIU in general is well equipped to handle niche. I mean, they have a lot of experience with the wall of wind. You know, they know what it takes to get a facility like this off the ground. So, you know, I think from that sense, you know, it's there's no better place for something like this.
Thank you so much, Doctor. And do we have a question from the audience? Please make sure to speak into the mic for our online friends.
I saw the video where you're including students and so forth. What is the relationship of the project with groups like the League of Cities, or you know, the people who actually enforce the zoning codes and who actually put them into operation? Is there any interaction there?
So the League of Cities, ICMA, those are our stakeholders, right? And we will be engaging with them in the design process of how to make information accessible, how to make results tangible, how to make them convincing. So those are our primary stakeholders. I'll be recruiting them this summer. So so if you have anyone you want to recommend, please let me know.
Sorry, just a two-part question. One, can you elaborate a little bit on the hardening opportunities? Because in Miami, housing is a major issue. There's a crisis right now in regards to affordability. A lot of people want to stay in their homes, but ensuring that they could reinvest in their homes, hardening infrastructure that could be done, if you could explain a little bit. And also, are there any natural or nature-based solutions that you're looking into as well, beyond just like traditional hard gray infrastructure as well? Thank you.
Yeah, I can start. I think my microphone works. So yeah, in terms of, I'll answer the first part, which is about hardening. It's all about mitigation techniques, you know, what we have been doing. A great deal of my research is towards codification. So we try to use the research findings beyond, you know, the academic publication to see how we can use this data to recommend, you know, to enhance the current building codes and wind standards. So definitely this is something that we have been doing, you know, already at the Wall of Wind. There are different ways of doing it, and I'll go back to the full scale. It always has a greater impact when you can see, you know, the effect, and that's a major advantage of a larger facility like Wall of Wind or potentially NIS, is that you have a real structure. Whoever observes in, you know, in real time the test, they're amazed. You know, it's totally different when you're there and you hear the fans and you see the impact. How, like, you know, larger components or, you know, like models that we place in front of the fans, they fly 50, 60 feet down, you know. We even have a debris wall to make sure that we keep everything within the premises, you know, because it can get really dangerous. So it's all about mitigation, hardening, hopefully through some of these programs, research and development. I talked about the industry relationships, so we also work closely with industry to make sure that whatever we learn from the tests translates into a product that will help eventually the average consumer. That was, I guess, the first part, and maybe Carolyn can go a bit into the second one.
I can give you just a couple of quick examples of products that we've researched and developed in our facility. So many of you, if you're familiar with the Wall of Wind, we did some research with ring shank nail, and that was something that was adopted into the building code and increased the performance of roofs, residential roofs, by 130%. And basically, it's the same size as a common bright nail, except it just has rings on it. So it creates that extra friction that's needed to hold onto the roof. That was I think an extra $20 per roof. I mean, it was a very simple, a very simple change. We've also done some work with rooftop equipment where the way that they are adhered to the rooftops was altered as well through research at our facility. As Janis mentioned, we also do a lot of research and development for private companies. So they come to us, they want to improve their products to make them more resilient and secure in a high wind setting. So that's something else. A lot of that involves non-disclosure, so we can't really reveal the details, but private industry is also interested in developing these products.
Well, thank you so much. I think we had a question in the front
I do have a
row.
question, and I want to thank you. He wants you to make it tough, but the question is not tough. First, I'm very happy that FIU is doing such a great job. My name is Roberto Munoz, and I'm the chairman of the Greater Miami Chamber of Commerce this year. And watching FIU grow when I graduated, so I'm a Panther in 1980. I'm also a Hall of Famer at FIU, and I sit on 3 different boards there: the Real Estate Board, Center for Financial Training, and also in the I'm a president. I'm a council president member. The question I have is a paradigm shift from where you are today, and that is, we talk a lot about rising water. So while we know hurricanes are getting stronger, we know that we are in the eye of hurricane activity. I know that the research that's being done is global in nature and can help countries. Bangladesh just went through a massive hurricane that normally kills many people because of the way they build. But the rising water for us is a real long-term threat that when it comes will be every day. It won't be once in a season or once every 5 years or once every 10 years. It will be an everyday event of rising water. And the rising water will affect not only the buildings that we have currently built, but the way that we build, period. Number one, our water that we drink with saltwater intrusion. Number two, the agriculture. Just 2% of salt won't allow crops to grow, just 2% level. And it rots all the appliances in your homes as well. So the question I have for you is, what work are you doing today in reference to a potential discussion of rising water? We know the wind discussion is happening. We believe rising water, if we have the models correctly pinned, that we'll be raising water by about 3 feet in this century. What are we doing to understand that and the effect in our market? I'll finally say that Miami has about $2 trillion worth of real estate. $2 trillion. It's a huge market. And therefore, South Florida is the same, all of Florida is the same, and many areas of the world are the same. What are we doing to become leaders in that field, to understand that field, and to really be cutting edge on the technology and understanding?
I can go first, and I'm going to talk as a wind expert. I'm not a water expert or storm surge expert, but I can give you one example of testing that was done at the Wall of Wind in the past few years. It's about elevated homes. And we looked from a wind engineering point of view. We wanted to find out what kind of wind load design guidelines for this type of structure, basically. They were not included in the wind standards or the building codes, so we did testing. My colleague, Dr. Amal El-Awari, we had collaborators from outside FIU, and we looked into the wind loads on elevated homes because that is one way of accounting for sea level rise and storm surge. And it was successful. The research was carried out, and eventually we submitted proposals to the ASC, American Society of Civil Engineering Committee, the wind load subcommittee, and as of the last version of the wind standard, 2022, has a section that specifically mentions elevated homes and what type of wind load we're supposed to use to design this kind of structure. So that was like a successful example of transferring the knowledge we gathered at the Wall of Wind to a wind standard, and eventually that will reach Florida Building Code and other codes, and we're going to design this type of structure, the elevated home, knowing better, what kind of wind load it would experience. So that's one example. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also not a water expert, but I do think that, the niche concept that we're talking about, we'll be able to look at some of these things. A lot of things, right, you're talking, 20 years in the future, 50 years in the future, what are the conditions going to be? I think niche gives us the opportunity to look at, what happens if you increase the water level by 2 feet, 3 feet? What are the impacts to infrastructure? So I think, niche will allow us to look at some of those things that may not be looked at right now because we don't really have the testing capability to look at future conditions per se.
Thank you so much. I believe we have time for one more question in the back.
Thank you for giving us some of your time. My question is related to, in Florida, we all face a big issue with the cost of property insurance. And I was wondering, as recently as December, we had a special session to deal just with that issue as homeowners and people that live in Florida. Are there any applications for what you're doing? I know you say you work with private industry. Do you work with insurance companies? Is there any applications that one of the biggest problems we have is attracting insurance companies to create that competition to drive costs down? Is there something that you can speak to as far as the applications of what you're doing to try to help Florida with that issue?
Yeah. I will ask Carolyn to go first with the Florida Public Loss Model, Hurricane Loss Model, and then I will add through the IUCRC the activities. Yeah.
Okay. So at the Wall of Wind facility, we do a lot of mitigation testing. We work in tangent with the Office of Insurance Regulation and the Division of Emergency Management to then use some of those results into what's called the Florida Hurricane Public Loss Model, which is supported through the Office of Insurance Regulation. So we can update vulnerability curves and see how those new mitigation techniques are affecting these catastrophe models. And then that knowledge can then be shared with other industry leaders, insurance industry leaders.
So yeah, one of I talked about the IUCRC, the Wind Hazard Infrastructure Performance Center that we have. One of the members is FIT. Professor Pinelli, Jean-Paul Pinelli, he has a leading role on the Florida Hurricane Public Loss Model. And through the center, we fund projects, research that eventually will enhance or improve their risk estimates. And we deal with loads, wind loading, wind-driven rain, the impact of rain intrusion on different type of structures. So there is always effort to use the research findings and transfer them either to a building code or a risk modeler. The companies that we work with in the IUCRC, I think the majority are from either insurance, reinsurance, or risk modeling. The truth is that they have been a lot more supportive, towards this effort because they understand the importance of doing this type of research, and it has a direct impact on their line of business. It is much harder for us to convince a more traditional civil engineering type of company, design, construction, why you should join this center. We do research, on wind hazard infrastructure performance, right? It was much easier to communicate with insurance, reinsurance, and risk modelers and convince them to pay the membership fees every year and do research. They see the greater benefit, and they get to use the data we generate at the Wall of Wind and the Texas Tech facility and FIT. So I think that has been traditionally working very well. The funding that Carolyn mentioned comes from OIR, Office of Insurance Regulation, Division of Emergency Management, Florida Division of Emergency Management, on a yearly basis, or often we get research funding to do to carry out projects that get to benefit, the insurance sector.
Well, thank you so much. We are out of time for a Q&A session, so can we please get a round of applause for our amazing guests here today? And I just want to highlight the importance of a special treat that we have here for you today. Please make sure to grab one of these on your way out. They're called AMPS, and FIU has a patent on it. I believe Carolyn may be able to speak more about AMPS.
Yeah, you can actually see the larger replica in the showcase room. So this is an architectural feature that was designed by some of our researchers. You would put it on the edge of a roof. And if you remember seeing Frank's video of the vortex, so this would disrupt the vortex hitting the roof, which would decrease the wind speed and therefore suction of the roof, but all the while harnessing clean energy. So the idea is
It's a wind lightning rod.
Exactly. Well, and you can then harness that energy to then perhaps use if power is disrupted after the storm. So that was the concept. Killing two birds with one stone.
So please make sure to grab one on your way out.
Cool. Thank you, Andres. Thank you, panelists. Please stay up here as I give some wrap-up remarks. Carlos Becerra, pleasure to welcome you here. We do want to thank the panel, and we're especially excited that this visiting group from Miami is able to see what is an FIU-led but really collaborative national initiative, this MSRIP program, which is going to be a multi-year. We're not, the outcomes are not known, the end result is not known. No one asked the key question. Curious as to where does this end up if it is indeed ever funded and located? Can anyone aim to answer that question?
Sure. Well, FIU is proactively seeking locations in the Miami area. So right now we have 2 sites that we're considering. So we're working with FIU leadership to see what additional investment needs to be made. They are currently owned by FIU, but there's some work that needs to be done to prepare the properties. And in the meantime, this think tank and all the other partners were completing the design. So the design for the facility will be finalized in, I guess, 3.5 years. The clock is ticking, no pressure. And then we'll present the designs to NSF and then apply for the additional funds for the larger facility.
And once again, we want to thank the National Science Foundation for being here today and being such strong supporters. We are excited to have the GMCC back in DC because this has always been an annual tradition, and I'm excited to see it return. Even before we had furniture, fun fact, at our previous location, the Greater Miami Chamber of Commerce was having their meetings with us. I do bring greetings on behalf of President Ken Jessel. As you all know, this is an important week for us on our main campuses. This is the week of his investiture. So unfortunately, he could not be here. He was hoping, depending on schedule, he could, but could not be possible. But we're very excited about this new era under Dr. Jessel. Welcome for returners or for those that had not been since the pandemic. Welcome to your home away from home at FIU in DC. While it might be hosted by FIU, this is really powered by who's in the room. This is about collaboration of our researchers, collaboration and very important work that happens in Miami. And hopefully you all feel and leave very welcome to come back, welcome to host your own programs and events and convene folks. We are here to advocate for our researchers and the solutions that they're about. You've heard somewhat about resilience and infrastructure. I do want to give a special shout out. We have Dr. Todd Crowell, Dr. Rita Teutonico, also in the audience. Resilience at FIU includes on the environmental side. I heard Sonia ask her question earlier, in the green infrastructure, et cetera. Population health. Earlier today, we had our engineering faculty up here, defense technologies, and I know the Greater Miami GMCC is headed to the Pentagon to have a lot of defense technologies, and the work that we do in additive manufacturing has been a strong emphasis here, and of course, Latin American and Caribbean. All of these themes, as you all know, and the Miami Chamber definitely knows, speak to Miami and the 305 for its challenges, granted, but also, and Kristen hit the nail on the head, the opportunity for us to serve as a unique lab. So as our reception begins, you're going to find some interactive panels on this wall. You'll see some featured cubbies. Take advantage of the time you have with us today to engage with what is the impact of that research. Carolyn's first slide was Hurricane Andrew. And we're very cognizant of the fact, and once again, it's a corporate message too. Those of us that lived through Hurricane Andrew know that in 1992, the first response was the private sector, and we will rebuild. And the state then followed, and then the federal investments then followed. So that is very much a very important story of FIU's story. We're also here to convene dialogues like today. Special shout out to Nicole Regalado, Michelle Trochet, Daniel Chavez, who's in our media lab. Programs like this, believe it or not, happen every week, a few times a week. This morning we started out the day with our folks hosting the State Department on a briefing on the Security Research Lab. We wanted to make sure that all of our local partners and Miami visitors got a taste to see what this is all about, because this is the business we're in. And of course, we're here to support our students in real ways. Great round of applause for Andres Velasco. He did mention he's recently graduated. What he didn't mention is he is on the market, folks. If anyone needs a great staffer and a great policy expert, Andres is for hire. But I'm excited to have so many of our alums visiting. Alex Dominguez with AT&T. Roberto, you gave yourself a Panther shout out. I saw Mayor Slesnik with us today. Deidre, so excited to have you here. Newly appointed, a very important perch at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. These are our examples of what is FIU's impact also on the national scene. And as a final point of personal privilege, prior to us opening this facility, many of you had been to our previous FIU in DC facility. It warms our heart to have representing the mayor of Miami-Dade County this evening, Tomas Alcala, who in a previous life was our governmental relations intern. He was Andres. So it's exciting to have you here, Tommy, and hopefully you know, as many other of our student interns have left their thumbprints, but you in particular have left your thumbprints on where we're at today. As a final step before our reception begins, and we're expecting a lot of congressional staffers, hopefully some of our members of Congress, it's an honor for me to introduce Alfred Sanchez with the Greater Miami Chamber of Commerce, our partner in this endeavor. You're hosting a great round of meetings this week, thanks to Matt Monica on your team. So, Alfred.
This is family. It really is. Thank you to FIU, and thank you for all that you have done for us, not just this time, but for many, many years. And yeah, we missed you during the COVID years, but we're back and raging so. So the Greater Miami Chamber has been around for, well, Miami was 10 years old when we were incorporated. And so we have really been there with the leaders of Miami, building the community from the ground up. And you heard We Will Rebuild. That was a huge chamber initiative, and so many other things. The Miami downtown, those of you who've been to Miami and have seen it in the past, you can appreciate what a difference we have today. That groundwork for that was laid 40 years ago by our then chair, Alva Chapman, who said, if we're going to inherit the mantle of the center of the world when Latin America was opening up, we gotta look the part. And so Homeless Trust, the Arts District coming up, all of the downtown redevelopment, all of that was because of the plans that the leadership in the Greater Miami Chamber had laid out, and here we are. So today, we're doing all of the legwork to do much of the planning for the future coming. Obviously, resiliency. There are 4 major issues that the Chamber carries. Resiliency is one of them. So you have a huge partner with us. Our chair of the Resiliency Committee is the Chief Bay Officer for the mayor, Irela Bagué, who has extreme knowledge and has been the champion for resiliency in the chamber for at least 10 years. And workforce housing, transportation, and workforce development. Those are all 4 things that are probably top of mind of almost every growing metropolitan community. And we're here to make sure that we champion that. And one last thing I'll leave you with, because we talked about the Homestead Air Force Reserve Base, an important partner. We are here to protect it because it's stability and future is in question. So we're meeting with the Pentagon tomorrow to really to carry that message. That is a huge economic driver. It's a huge partner, not only during times of peace but war, and then also during disasters, because we got the National Guard and all of that comes out of that. So thank you again for letting us be here. Thank you to our chairman, who has provided incredible leadership for this year. We probably have the most successful year that the chamber has had in probably the last 20 years. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for all the hard work you've done for that. And so many of the other folks. So thank you again for hosting us. We're looking forward to tonight.
Programming note, Congresswoman Frederica Wilson is on the way, so we're going to repair ourselves to the reception area. Know that when she arrives, we'll probably give her a chance to greet the chamber and our guests. So thank you. Thank you all.
What, you're bolting? Yeah.
So much. Yeah, appreciate it.
Yes.